We're going to be staying with sports and turning to the Women's Football World Cup, which kicks off here in France tomorrow. It's expected to be the biggest yet in terms of viewing figures and bums on seats inside the stadiums. 24 teams will be battling it out for the top spot over the next 4 weeks. The competition comes at a time where there is growing debate about the equality between male and female players. And for more on that, I'm joined now in the studio by my colleague Rosie Collyer, who is going to be covering the event for RFI. Rosie, over to you.
Well, actually, my coverage has already begun because all 24 teams have arrived here in France already. And I was with the Nigerian and the Norwegian teams yesterday in the city of Reims. That's in the kind of northeast of France. It's the Champagne capital.
Country.
Yeah, so automatically a sort of celebratory feel to that city. So they're at their training grounds and they're going to be facing each other on Saturday. But we're joined in the studio also by two special guests. Thank you both for being here. So first of all, Claire Bloomfield. She's a women's football journalist who's based in the UK, but you're here in Paris for the World Cup. Are you going to go beyond Paris, Claire?
Yes, I'll be following England throughout the duration of the tournament, and all being well, that'll be right through to the 7th of July.
It's looking confident.
Great that you're here with us today. Yeah, a lot of confidence there. And then also, thank you ever so much for being here, Kethevane Gorjestani. You're a sports presenter just next door at our sister TV station, France 24. So thanks for being with us today. And as I said, I've been in the city of France with some players people who will be watching this perhaps later on our YouTube channel can see some of the players that I've been speaking to behind me. So with the Norwegian camp and the Nigerian camp. And what I took away really, especially from the Nigerian camp, there's a couple of players there that have, one who's played in 5 World Cups. Another girl I was speaking to, Francesca Ortega, and she really is a girl. She's just 19 years old. She's a forward, very flamboyant young lady. She's played in 3 World Cups. And actually what she told me yesterday was that she really felt that this World Cup is better organised than any that she's been involved in before. And actually my meeting was with her during a photo shoot, so a FIFA photo shoot. They were taking portraits of all the players that will probably be up on their website. So it's really a sense, for me at least, I took away just from that first kind of mission for this, is that this is going to be the biggest yet. So Claire, I know you've been speaking to a lot of players in the run-up to this World Cup. Which for you are the teams, players to watch out for besides England?
This World Cup for me is the most exciting Women's World Cup we've ever seen, by a long way. For me, it's no longer just a battle between Germany and the USA. It's wide open. And I think that is also because we've seen such an improvement in the leagues, particularly around Europe. And obviously, we know that the USA have a long history of developing young players and a strong league there. But I think now you can't rule out France. They obviously have the home advantage. There is obviously 7 Lyon players in that side. Corinne Diacre, I've been very impressed with what I've seen of her lately. I hear from the press conference she's done this morning that she also has a fully fit squad. So you have to obviously include France. I would also pick out England, of course. I mean, England have been absolutely phenomenal, besides that last unexpected hiccup against New Zealand last week. But I mean, they have, I know you mentioned their players who are going to multiple World Cups. We have Jill Scott, who is on her way to her 4th World Cup, who will be instrumental in that midfield role for England. So yeah, obviously Germany as well. We know they have pedigree, but I think some of the challenges we've seen before, the likes of Japan, I don't think they'll even come close. I think someone like that, although they're winners from 2011, I don't think they'll get past the last 16.
Interesting. So yeah, it's a decline of Japan perhaps, but obviously remains to be seen. But over to you, Kethevane. France 24, I know, are following France and the US mainly, obviously other teams as well. So tell us about some of the star players on each of those teams.
Well, of course, we're going to start with the US because they are the most star-studded team in this competition. They've been for a long time. So they have really this advertising power because everyone knows some of those players. I'm thinking, of course, of Alex Morgan. She is the superstar of that US team. She's on every single billboard across the United States. They went on a tour with friendly games throughout the US, and everywhere they went, there were thousands of people to come see them. So it was really, Alex Morgan is the face of that team. There's, of course, Megan Rapinoe. There's Carly Lloyd, the veteran, who has been there for a while. So they have a lot of stars. And the French team, and Claire pointed out at the Lyon core of this French team, 7 players from Lyon. Lyon, of course, being the best team in Europe. They're 4-time Champions League winners, defending Champions League winners. They've won 17 national titles. So they really are the best team in France, best team in Europe. And 7 of those players are playing for the French squad. And of course, there are a few other stars. There's Marta, the Brazilian superstar, the women's Pelé, as she's been called. There's Jennifer Marajan for Germany, who also plays for Lyon. So a lot of names now that you recognize, that people, that the public recognize, compared to maybe 4 years ago or 8 years ago when no one really knew many names. Today, I think there are superstars in women's football.
And then certainly here in France, just the past few days, the National Rail, SNCF, they have a nationwide campaign. So every train station in the country has a poster of the French national team. But I understand that in Britain that they've even gone further with sort of getting behind the English team. So tell us what you've seen on the streets of the UK.
Well, we've seen various murals have been put up in significant places around the UK. So, for example, Beth Mead, the Arsenal forward, she is from Whitby originally in the northeast of England, and there's a mural there. And they've basically picked out all of those key locations around the UK and put up these various murals. We've also seen that a campaign, I believe, is backed by Twitter. They've also done kind of similar portraits and artwork, and you can go through sort of train stations and town centres and shopping malls, and you will see these huge billboards advertising the Lionesses, encouraging people to either watch coverage on television or buy tickets to a game. And there's an awful lot of coverage for the shirts as well, the Nike shirts. Obviously, it's the first time that the girls have had a bespoke kit, and they're going down very well.
And I'm actually wondering whether or not to invest probably 50, 60 euros in the Nigerian shirt or the English shirt. That remains to be seen. Now, there are 4 newcomers in this World Cup. Chile, Jamaica, Scotland and South Africa, which for me is a sign of the growing popularity, as we've been talking about, of women's football around the world. I mean, take, for instance, Jamaica, who I'll be following next week in Grenoble. Until 5 years ago, they didn't even have a women's team. But then Bob Marley's daughter, Cedella Marley, stepped in and she bankrolled basically the women's team via her father Bob Marley's foundation. So that's a really nice story, and we'll be speaking to her on Sunday, so hopefully she'll be in the programme next week. Scotland, as I said, are among the newcomers. So Claire, tell us what you know about their journey, Scotland's journey to this World Cup.
Well, it went right to the wire for them. They were waiting on a result between Switzerland and Poland. Like I say, as we were talking earlier with Shelley Kerr, she's built a very strong, very determined side. Obviously, Scotland in their first ever World Cup. But it did look a little bit unsure towards the end. There was, as the match was drawing to a close, the players were looking to the bench. Shelley Kerr, the manager, was being informed by her backroom staff. They were all kind of keeping an eye, probably on social media and so on, with colleagues dotted around Europe, keeping tabs on all of those games. So it did go right to the wire for Scotland. They've done it the hard way, but they're there now. You know, they're in a World Cup for the first time, and they've done something that the men haven't done since 1998, I think.
That is a good point, actually, because you don't equate Scotland with male football, at least, but with women's football, yeah. And, you know, strong side, not sure about their ranking, but do you think they'll make it through the group stages?
I think there could be a surprise candidate, actually. One player which was particularly impressed me is Erin Cuthbert at Chelsea. Still only 20, scores phenomenal goals. Actually scored an incredible one at Hampden Park the other night against Jamaica. I think even she was surprised it went in. I don't think she actually understands just how good she is. But I think if Scotland can keep a clean bill of health, which they've struggled to at other tournaments they've been in 2017 in the Euros, I think they could be a surprise candidate. They're certainly fired up and ready to go, and Shelley Kerr drives a tight ship.
It's good to know. But while women's football has come a long way in recent years, there's still a long way to go in terms of equal pay, both at the national level, but also in the club level. I mean, even in Norway, where the Football Federation recently have agreed to pay women the same as men playing for the national team. At the club level, women struggle to make a living there in Norway. I was speaking to Emily Naudnes yesterday. She's a defender for the team, and she's 20 years old, so she's still at university, but she says that she's almost certainly going to have to get a career aside from her football, even though she is playing in the Premier Division there in Norway. So, and then Kethevane, just turning to you, France 24 rather, interviewed Ada Hegerberg recently. Now, for our listeners rather, who don't know who she is, just fill us in on Ada Hegerberg and her kind of story.
Well, she is the best player, women's football player in the world. She recently won the first ever women's Ballon d'Or. The Ballon d'Or is almost like the Player of the Year, but it was reserved to the men up until now. So she is the best player, but she will not be taking part in this World Cup. She has dropped out of the Norway Football Federation, taking a stand on the inequality between the men and women. Now, she hasn't been with them since 2017, so it was before that they struck that agreement for equal pay. And when Annette Young interviewed her for the show 51%, Ada Hegerberg, the first question was, why did you decide to take that stand? She said, I tried. I fought from within, from inside, trying to change, trying to get them to understand, and seeing how we were treated. I felt that at some point I had to take a bigger stand, which was leaving the team because nothing was changing. And then the second question was, why, now that they have equal pay, does that still stand? And her first answer was, it's not just about money, because there's no money in women's football. That's what she said. And she said that it's not just about money. It's not just about equal pay. It's about how they are treated. And we've seen it around the world, how they travel to venues, which hotels they stay at, their gear, the pitches. There was a big fight in the US because the women had to train on AstroTurf as opposed to real pitch. So it's more than just getting exactly the same amount of money. It's the treatment and the respect, and that was her main point for Ada Hegerberg.
It's interesting you say that, because earlier this week there was an event at UNESCO, whose headquarters are here in Paris, and I met with a young lady by the name of Nadia Nadim. Now, she's an incredible personal story. Just in brief, she escaped Afghanistan as a refugee, then encountered football in a refugee camp in Denmark, and today plays for the national team. But Denmark aren't in this World Cup, and part of the reason for that is that the players went on strike last year during the qualifying stages, and then were to play Sweden, their arch rivals, but because they were on strike, they didn't play, and then that pretty much contributed to them losing out in their group stages. But she said it's not just about the pay, exactly as Ada is saying. It's also about the equal treatment, which I thought was quite interesting, because Nadia Nadim today plays for PSG, and I think she has a reasonable salary, probably a little bit better than the French public sector salary, that's for sure, but still at the national level there are these debates about around the treatment of players. So now at the club level, let's turn to you, Claire. You're based in England. Obviously on the men's level, England, the Premiership is multi-billion-dollar, euro, pound, whatever you want to call it, business. But the situation at the club level for women in England, just fill us in on that, please.
It's very different. WSL1, the equivalent to the Premier League, the top flight of women's football, has only been fully professional for a short time, just a couple of years. So the clubs with money can obviously pay players anything from maybe 20 to 30,000 pounds per year, still well below the 150 grand a week that you might see from some of the big stars in the Premier League. But it very much is dictated by how much money these clubs have got and the backing that they have. So, for example, WSL2, the second tier of English football for women in the UK, Manchester United entered their first women's team into that league, but they could afford to be fully professional, even though they were competing against clubs who, had low budgets. Most of their players also had part-time jobs. So at the first time of asking, they've been promoted to WSL 1, which is not really a surprise. And then you see the likes of Man City, who are actually the first team to give all of their players professional contracts, full-time professional contracts. And they introduced things like the same level of nutrition and expertise and training that the men would have. But then you have clubs the likes of Yeovil, who they're relegated. They were professional at one stage due to a lack of funding. Those dreams for a lot of those girls have come crashing down because the club just don't have the finances to keep going.
But then on the men's circuit, as it were, a lot of it comes down to advertising. So I wonder what sort of needs to happen in order to be able to pull in more advertising to women's football. I mean, does women's football sort of still have an image problem, or what do you think?
I think it's more about making sure women's football is part of the conversation 365 days a year in the same way it is with the men's football. So we shouldn't just be peaking in and around big tournaments like we are now, where everybody's talking about the World Cup, but this should have really consistent media coverage across all platforms. And I think that will help to drive the audience, educate an audience. It's actually amazing how many fans of the Premier League who are avid followers of the English Premier League who've never been to a WSL game. And for example, towards the end of the season, we had Lyon playing Chelsea at Kingsmeadow Stadium in the semi-final of the Women's Champions League, and it was sold out, but it's still only a very, very small crowd. The stadium has a capacity of about 8,000 people. So I think if it's part of the conversation longer term, and we start to see them engaging with sponsors, and they have campaigns on billboards and things, as we're seeing around the national team, then perhaps we can take it further.
The situation in the US, I get the impression, is very different, because all of the women I spoke to yesterday, both from Nigeria and then also from Norway, I asked them the sort of question, about their future, what do they want next? And all of them said to me, the US, with stars in their eyes. What are the US doing to get it right, do you think?
They've got a long history of doing it right, and I think that's always been very attractive for a lot of players. And there was a point, certainly, where players felt like going to the US was their only option to take a professional career in football. It wasn't possible in any other nation. But that is slowly changing now. There's plenty of interest in going to the Women's League in Spain. Obviously, Barcelona have been very successful. France is now an option where we're seeing actually Man City are becoming a bit of a feeding ground for Lyon, and they're picking up players left, right and centre at the moment. So Nikita Paris is about to head over to Lyon after the World Cup. So, the Americans are doing it very well. They fill out stadiums. They have huge support, which is something actually going back to Nadia Nadim. I know she talked about during her time in the US. It's something which took her a long time to adjust to in England, because that kind of frenzy, that crazy support, that army of fans that follow you everywhere you go, it just wasn't there for her in England. And I think that was something that she really missed.
And she did actually tell me that she's happier here at PSG, but I think that's more a case of, she said that, living in a big world city as opposed to rainy Manchester. We've spoken a little bit about Lyon as well during this programme, Kethevane. There's Lyon, there's obviously PSG. What other sort of teams are there here in France that are professional, do we know?
I mean, a lot of them are professional. The problem in France is that you really have a huge gap between Paris Saint-Germain, Lyon, and then the rest of, maybe Montpellier a little bit is kind of in the middle, and then the rest of the teams just can't compete with these two giants. I mean, even Paris Saint-Germain has trouble competing with Lyon, which has the best players, the most money, the biggest infrastructure. So there's still a big gap before we have a competitive league in France.
But lots happening, but as we say, takeaway, still much more to do. Thank you very much, Kethevane Gorjestani, for joining us on Radio France International today, and also to you, Claire Bloomfield. Thank you both, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone. That brings us to the end of Paris Live for today. Do join us again tomorrow, 1300 hours GMT. Goodbye.